Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar on YouTube Live. My name is Roy Rim. I am one of the marriage and family therapists over at Light the Way Counseling Center. Today, we are going to be talking about the art of fighting. Ooh. All right, clap off. Now, the art of fighting. Fighting is a communication that all human beings do. We're going to have a differences of opinions. We're going to have a differences of thought. And fighting is a way that we negotiate it. However, not a lot of people do it very well. And so I thought today for our webinar that it'd be a good subject for us to broach. How do we fight productively? What is an effective way of fighting? Especially since everyone does it, and especially because it pops up in marriage quite often. And so today, with the art of fighting, we're going to go over the outline for having a good fight and some sub techniques that we can use within the art of fighting. Now, firstly, as we start, one of the crucial things that we have to understand in therapy is that the more we understand or the more we are aware of our situation or problem, the better that we can plan a course of action. Right? So I'm going to repeat that again. The more we understand or the more awareness we have, the better we can plan a course of action. So I'm going to take something simple like a cough. What does that mean? Right? It could be a cold, it could be COVID, it could be a flu, it could be strep throat, it could be bronchitis. There's a million reasons for why you have a cough. The more you understand what that cough means, the better you know your course of action. So something like a cold, let's say you have a cough and then you go to the doctor and he says, hey, don't worry about it. It's just a common cold. What do? Drink some liquids, get some bed rest, right? And in a couple of days, you'll be feeling better. Let's say you take a test and it comes out positive for COVID. What do? You get some bed rest and you take some liquids alone, right? So that it's a different course of action based on what you have. And so the more understanding that you have, the better you know which direction you have to go. As we start this conversation, if you guys have any questions that come up, please don't hesitate to ask. Throw them in, and at the end of our webinar, I will be answering a couple questions for you guys. Now, I want to start off with the outline. I got a little thing for this as well. The outline. Ooh. And now the outline, I put in there the subtitle, The Delicious Burger. This is something that my pastor actually says a lot, the burger bun, right? And that's because we got the bun, we got the patty, and then we got the bun again. And so what you're going to see with the outline is there's two things to remember when you are in a fight. The first thing is order. Now, in a fight, I think something that happens is it's very subjective. The fight is something where everyone kind of does a fight a little bit differently, right? Some people over here will be arguing until the dawn shows up, right? A couple over here will be fighting and then they'll not talk to each other for 2 weeks, right? So everybody does things a little bit differently. And the most important question to ask is, when should your thoughts, when should your feelings be heard? Not what. Of course, what is your feelings and your thoughts should be heard. Not who. Everyone should be heard. Everything should be heard. But when? When is a very important question. Who should go first? Who should do the listening? I think when this isn't established, what happens is people will try to interrupt, interject, bump heads when things come to a disagreement, which leads to our second thing, which is if you don't have an order, you cannot close out a topic. So number one is order. Number two is closing out. When you don't have a specific order in how to fight, you can't close out topics because you will get lost in the sauce. You will get distracted. You will start going off on side tangents. And closing out is a very, very important understanding to healing. When you can close something out, when you have a giant to-do list, let's say this to-do list is for work, when you check them off, you don't have to worry about them anymore. In emotional hurts, when you have a to-do list and you don't check them off, they remain there and they crop up again later at a future time. And that's why it's important to be able to close it out. In order to close out, you need to have a specific order for how to fight. Now, I'm going to go into this burger bun and some of the techniques that we're going to be using practically. So think of a burger. You got the bun, you got the patty, you got another bun. Right? That first top bun is what we call contributions and apologies. I'll get into that a little bit later. The second portion is the patty, which is going to be 3 techniques: reflective listening, validating statements, and clarifying questions. And then the bottom bun is going to be, again, contributions and apologies. So I'll start off on those topics right now. So we call it the delicious burger. We'll go into the top bun, Now, that first part of the bun is going to be contributions. I think everybody knows what contributions mean. In the context of a couple, especially in the context of an argument, contributions are what you can acknowledge as your wrongful doings. Here's the thing. In any situation, there are 2 parties that contribute. Especially in a fight, there are 2 parties that contribute, possibly more. What can you acknowledge as your wrongful doings? Now, here's the thing. People can tell you what your contributions are, but for the sake of this exercise, what I want you to focus on is what can you acknowledge as a wrongful doing? Forget about what the other person is saying for now, because we can address that later. But what can you acknowledge first of your own volition? Because I think that's really important. If you disagree with what they're saying is your contribution, that's fine, right? Listen to them later, and then maybe later on you can acknowledge it and accept it. The first thing you want to do, especially in this top bun, is what can you acknowledge from the start? There's 2 reasons for why you want to do this. Number 1 is that with the when you start with the contributions, you're starting off with accountability. You want to be able to take accountability for what is yours, because you're kind of setting off with this understanding that everybody does wrong, and so you're taking accountability for your part first. Right? Secondly, what contributions do is it starts off the conversation on a much higher level. When you acknowledge your contributions, what's happening is you're starting off by saying, let me be humble first. And when you do that, it allows the other person to follow in those footsteps. It also allows the other person to have a more humble heart when it's their turn to talk as well. And so you're doing 2 things. Number 1, you're taking accountability. Number 2, you're starting the conversation off on a more humble approach. Now, apologies. That's the second part of this top bun, as you can see. Apologies. Now, apologies. I think this is one of those topics as well where people have their own different definition of it. But if you look at what makes an apology effective, I would split the apology into 2 parts: the "I'm sorry" statement, which is the apology statement, and then there's acknowledgement. Right? I'm sorry for hurting you this way. I'm sorry for hurting you this way. And what's effective in this apology is not the "I'm sorry." It's actually the second portion, which is the acknowledgement of your hurts. I'm sorry for hurting you in such and such way. If you said "I'm sorry," people will find that dismissive. Let's get rid of that first part for a second and go into the acknowledgement. Hey, I know that I hurt you in this way, and this is what you felt. Ooh, even with that acknowledgement, people will start to feel better. So I'm sorry is actually for one purpose. It's to start off and saying, this is my apology. But I'm sorry is not the most effective part of the apology. The acknowledgement is. The acknowledgement of the hurt. Here's a couple of things with an apology. Number 1, apologize for your actions only. And what that means is sometimes you'll hear an apology and it'll be, hey, I'm sorry that you felt this way. Apologies are supposed to be accountability. Accountability. You cannot take accountability for somebody else's actions. You can only take accountability for your actions. So rather, when you do an apology, you say, I'm sorry for such and such action that I did that made you feel this way, that hurt you in this way, right? So that will be an effective apology. I'm sorry for saying those mean things to you and making you feel hurt. And I know how much that hurt you, right? So that will be an effective apology. Now, that top bun, going back to this overarching idea of top bun, is contributions and apology. When you look at a fight, or let's say you look at a disagreement, you look at an argument, first step to do, right? And pick somebody, and the spouse number one, spouse number two. I'm not, it's up to you guys who goes first. But spouse number one goes, and they say, hey, these are my contributions. These are the things that I can acknowledge as my wrongful doings. This, and this. And it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be something catastrophic that you did. It could be small. Hey, I'm sorry I raised my voice. Hey, I'm sorry I gave you a mean look. I'm sorry I didn't talk to you for the first 10 minutes when I stepped into the house. Sorry I slammed the door, right? It could be something even small, right? And I would say you don't even have to go into a list of 10. Even if it's one, you're starting this conversation off with a contribution. So you say, hey, this is a contribution that I brought into this, right, to make it escalate. And I apologize because I know how this is how you felt about it, and it's from my actions. Right? And so that's the top bun that we're talking about. Now we're going to go into the patty. In a burger, if we've got the bun, I think the most important part is going to be the patty. And so the patty is going to be three things. It's going to be the reflective listening, validating statements, and clarifying questions. Now in this is going to be a speaker. It's going to be one whole technique. It's going to be a speaker-listener technique where one person is a speaker during this whole time and one person is a listener for the whole time. The speaker's job is going to be to talk about their perspective. Talk about your perspective. When you do this, make sure that you're sharing an emotion. Now, I'll ask people, how did that make you feel? And when I say the word feel, for some reason, people go into their thoughts. Oh, I feel, or I felt like you didn't care about me. Here's the thing, that's your perspective for sure, but that's not really sharing an emotion. Is the emotion anger? Is the emotion abandonment? Is the emotion feeling alone? Is the emotion feeling betrayed? Why did you feel like I didn't care about you? And that's going to be really important. When you share your perspective, make sure that the emotion is going to be put in there. I felt alone. I felt betrayed. Emotions, and this is kind of a counselor trope, but emotions, how do you feel, right? Emotions are very important, and it's a core foundation for healing. The more specific you are with your emotions, the better the understanding for the other individual, and the better they can take action. Right? So more understanding leads to better action. The more specific you are, the better their understanding. Right? So that's how it goes. Now that's the speaker's job in the speaker listener technique. The listener's job is going to be three things: the reflective listening, validating, and the clarifying questions. So we'll start off with reflective listening. Reflective listening. Reflective listening is a simple technique where you repeat what you heard. There's different ways of doing this. I'm not going to get too deep into it right now. One way you could do it is I'm hearing you say yada, 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 yada. Right? Another way you can do it is just simply repeating back what you heard. Even if it's a one-word repeat or if it's a summarized statement, you're repeating back what you heard. Now, there's three reasons for doing this and three situations that I personally would use it. Three reasons you would do this in. Number one is so that the speaker feels heard. There's a couple of important things with this. When the speaker feels heard, they will be more willing to hear you, right? The conversation is going to go better. Number two, when the speaker feels heard, they feel good. They feel good. It's good to feel heard. And so that's also going to make the conversation go better. So number one, you're setting up a model for how the conversation should go. This is what listening looks like. Number two, you're trying to make them feel better. And that's the whole point of the argument, is you're trying to get to a better place together. Now, the second reason why you would use this is you want to be on the same playing field. You want to be on the same level. What does that mean? That means sometimes we talk and we have an idea of what we want to say in our heads. We have an image, but the other person doesn't know that. And then we'll use confusing words like this or that or it. I felt so angry about this. And they have no idea what you're saying. And so when you do a repeat, you can clarify those moments, right? What does this mean? I'm hearing you say this. Did you mean this? Or did you mean the game? Did you mean the dance? I want to make sure that I understand you. I was so upset when you said that thing at school. I'm like, oh, what was that thing? Which statement? Because I said a lot of different things. I'm not sure what you're talking about. And so one use of reflective listening is to get on the same playing field. Now, the third thing is to be able to connect when you disagree, to be able to connect when you disagree. I think of this as two people fighting and holding hands while they're doing it, right? Two people fighting while they're holding hands. That's awkward. That's an awkward image. But if you think about it, right, it's a sign of security, commitment, respect for one another. And reflective listening is just that. When you can say, hey, I disagree with what you're saying, but I'm going to give you the courtesy and the respect to be able to reflect it back to you. I'm hearing you say this and this and this, right? And so that's reflective listening. Very simple tool. 3 situations I would use this in. Number 1 is when I disagree. When I hear something that I disagree with, the first thing that I'm going to do is reflective listening. Okay, so you're saying that the New England Patriots are the best football team in existence. Is that right? And I'm going to, you don't know if I agree or disagree, but I'm going to make sure that you feel heard about that. Now, number 2 is when the message is too long, when the conversation is too long, I will use reflective listening to cut down and to make little chapters or little segments. I'll go, whoa, 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 before you keep going. So I'm hearing you say blah, 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 right? Okay, please continue. And then I'll go a little further and you'll go, oh, before we go further, I'm hearing you say blah, blah, blah. Is that right? Okay, and so you're cutting it into little segments so that you can remember better and they feel heard as they're going along so that you're not missing anything important. Now, the third situation I would use this in is when you don't know how to respond. You're not sure what they're looking for. You're not sure what to say or if you have anything to say. And so you use some reflective listening. And what happens is they feel heard. When they feel heard, they feel good. When they feel good, they're going to go deeper because they feel safe. And so you're going to be able to extrapolate a lot more information by doing the reflective listening. Now, the second technique in the PADI is going to be validating statements. Validating statements. Validating statements are not agreement. They are not agreement. More importantly, I think the important aspect of validating statements is perspective taking. Perspective taking. So what you're saying there is, I can understand that. I can understand your perspective. You're not agreeing with it. You're saying I can understand it, right? So I can see how A will make you feel B. I can see how crisp fall air can remind you of your childhood and walking to school with your sister. I've never done that, but I can see it. I can see how that would remind you of it. I get it. When I think of crisp fall air, I think of apple picking. I think of an orchard. I think of, jumping on leaves. But I can see how for you, this would remind you of this thing. Right? And so you're showing understanding and empathy by using validating statements. You're saying, I understand, I get it. This is how I understand it. Another way to do it is to actually give your own version of that story, right? Hey, I get it. I can see how that would remind you of this thing, right? For me, whenever I think of fall, I think of this. And so I can understand why you feel so good about it. Right? And so those are different ways to do validating statements. Once again, it's not agreement. But what you're saying is, I can see how that can happen. I can see how that can make you feel. Now, the last part of this PADI is going to be clarifying questions. When we don't understand something or we're curious, a little bit more curious about it. So clarifying questions is questions you can use to clarify their thoughts, their feelings, their situation, right? Here's an example. How did that make you feel, right? I want to know how you felt during that situation. Were you angry or more annoyed? That's another clarifying question. Is that something you felt before with your friends? Chocolate or vanilla? Right? I want to know. Do you like chocolate or do you like vanilla? How does an FHA loan really work? Right? So these are clarifying questions where you're curious. You want to go into deeper understanding of their situation, their thoughts, or their feelings. They are not, clarifying questions are not statements. So I'll hear things like this a lot. If we had done things my way, wouldn't it have been better? Just because there's a question mark at the end doesn't make it a question. That's more of a critical statement. If we had done things my way, wouldn't it have been better? That was a dumb idea, wasn't it? You don't think you were being sarcastic, right? Why didn't you just listen to me? And these are not questions, these are statements. How can anyone choose vanilla over chocolate, right? So these are statements that you're making, not necessarily clarifying questions for yourself. Clarifying questions are to clarify the other person's perspective for you. And that means you are curious and you want to know them, their feelings, their situation better. Now, when you're doing the pad, going back to this overarching theme, the speaker listener technique, one person is speaking about their perspective. The other person, the listener, is going to be using a combination of these three techniques, the reflective listening, validating statements, and clarifying questions, to make the other person feel understood and empathized with. To make them feel understood and empathized with. So in the PADI, that is what the listener is doing, asking questions. Oh, so when I said this to you, how did it make you feel? Why was this thing that happened between us such a big deal for you? Because in my family, it wouldn't have been a big deal, but I'm trying to understand why it made you blow up, right? Those are clarifying questions. Oh, okay, I get it. I can see how, this thing that I did or said to you would make you feel this way. Because in a similar situation, I went through something similar and it made me feel really upset. So I get it, right? Or, okay, so you're saying this, is that right? I just want to make sure we're on the same page. So you're going to be using a combination of all three. And that's really, it's something that you have to practice and something that you have to do. Remember, the order is the important thing. You want to start off with contributions and apologies. Then you go into the perspectives, right? And then the last portion is going to be the bottom bun, the bottom bun. So we go back into contributions and apologies. Now you've heard the other person's perspective, right? I'm talking from the listener's perspective here. You've heard the other person's perspective. And so now you go back into contributions and apologies. Is there something in here that you didn't think was your contribution, but after hearing their perspective, you kind of see it, you kind of get it. You're like, oh, you know what? I get it. Maybe that was messed up of me to do. Maybe that wasn't the best thing to say in that situation. Let me apologize for that, right? And so you have one burger, and then you switch sides. Now spouse number two does contributions and apologies, and then they become the listener for the patty, and then they end with contributions and apologies again. That is, if I can put it very simply and a little bit broadly, that is the art of fighting. I think that's a good order to keep in mind as you go into your fighting. Now we're coming up to time. So if anybody here had a question, please feel free to ask it. And as I get them, I will be answering them. As we go into the Q&A portion, I just wanted to give out an offer. If there is anybody who wants to learn a little bit more, anybody who wants to talk about the relationship, I am giving a 15-minute free consultation for those that want to get to know a little bit more of what I do and want to see if they can use this opportunity to do some couple counseling. So 15-minute free consultations from now until December 15th. Reach out to me via email. My email is roy.rim@likethewaycounseling.com. So Roy, R-O-Y, .rim, R-I-M as in Mary, likethewaycounseling.com. Or you can reach me on my phone, 201-444-8103, 23-pound. So 201-444-8103, 23-pound to reach me directly. All right, so let me wait and see if there's any questions that come in. Okay, so looks like there are no questions that came in, and you guys have made my job easier. So thank you very much, everybody. I think that we can end our session here. Is there, from our co-organizers, is there anything else that we need to do? If not, maybe we can sign off and say, have a good day. All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care.